All right, we're jumping into a huge topic today, one that comes from a source asking maybe the biggest question there is. If we're not alone, who's visiting us? And what in the world do they want? Okay, so let's get right into it. The source material doesn't mess around. It just lays out the central mystery right from the get-go. And really, this one question, it just cracks open a whole universe of possibilities. Some of them you've probably heard before, but some, they get really, really strange. So, how do you even start to tackle a question that big? Well, the first thing this analysis does is try to make sense of it all. It creates like a catalog of the visitors. It sifts through tons and tons of encounter reports and starts grouping them into categories. We'll start with the ones you'd probably recognize, and then we'll move into some that are way more unsettling. And first up, you guessed it, the most iconic face in all of ufology, the Greys. Now, the text we're looking at breaks them down into two main types, based on what witnesses say. You've got your short Greys, who seem to be the workers, doing the hands-on stuff, and then you have the tall Greys, who always seem to be the ones calling the shots. So look at these characteristics. What's absolutely fascinating here is just how consistent this description is. I mean, we're talking thousands of alleged encounters, and people keep describing the same thing over and over. But there are also these little variations, right? Different skin tones, sometimes 3 fingers, sometimes 4. And that's where the source asks a really sharp question. Are these real biological differences we're seeing, or is it something else, like a kind of mental manipulation where what we think we're seeing isn't the full picture? But the catalog doesn't just stop at beings that are obviously not from around here. This is where it gets maybe a little more unnerving. We're talking about reports of beings that look, well, they look just like us, perfectly human. The source doesn't even call them visitors, it calls them infiltrators, suggesting they're already here, living among us. And this is a really key point in the text. It's the huge difference in how these two groups supposedly operate. The human-looking ones, they're described as being conversational, they engage with people, and most importantly, they seem to respect free will. But the Greys, their encounters are almost always tied to abductions, which are anything but consensual. And that difference, consent versus control, that's a major, major theme we're going to see come up again. It also seems like there might be a kind of hierarchy here. The source talks about other beings, like these towering insect-like creatures people call the mantids. And what's interesting is that when they show up in abduction stories, they're not just hanging around in the background. Nope. They're often described as being the ones in charge, basically overseeing the Greys while these complex procedures are happening. Okay, so if these different beings are here, what exactly are they doing? That's the logical next step, right? And this is where the analysis takes a deep dive into the abduction phenomenon, which, let's be honest, is pretty disturbing stuff. It tries to find a pattern, to figure out if there's a purpose behind all these encounters that people say they never agreed to. And what the author finds is a stunningly consistent pattern, reported over and over by people who claim to be abductees. This isn't described as some chaotic, random event. It's a procedure. It's efficient, it's systematic, and it's almost always done against their will. Even crazier, if anyone else is around, witnesses are just switched off, completely unaware until it's over. And to really bring home the personal side of this, the source zeroes in on one specific case, a man they call Danny. His story is just terrifying. He describes a procedure where something, an object of some kind, was pushed up through his nose and into his brain. He never asked for it, the beings just did it, and it left him with all these chronic health issues. But Danny's story had another layer to it, something even more shocking. He said that a human, a decorated military officer, was there. And not only was he there, he seemed totally familiar with what was happening, just standing by while the whole thing went down. I mean, that detail alone just blows the lid off, suggesting that maybe there's some kind of human involvement here. So, this is the point where the analysis shifts gears. We're moving away from the physical what happened and into the truly mind-bending how did it happen. How is it even possible for these beings to have such incredible control over someone's mind, over their consciousness and their memory? The theory put forward is that telepathy isn't some kind of magic. It's either a biological skill or a technology, and it's tied to brain waves we can actually measure, specifically extra-low frequency or ELF waves. And here's the wild part. It suggests that when we humans go into deep meditation, our brains start producing these exact waves. It's almost like we're sending out a beacon, making ourselves detectable to anyone or anything that's mastered this kind of communication. So once you start thinking about mental control and hidden communication, the author uses that as a jumping off point for a much, much bigger idea, a really radical one actually. And it connects this whole modern UFO phenomenon to, believe it or not, ancient philosophy. The text draws this incredible parallel. It asks, what if all these modern stories of controlling non-human beings are just a new version of something people were writing about 2,000 years ago? You see, ancient Gnostic texts warned about these powerful, deceptive beings they called archons. And the Gnostics claimed these archons created our physical world as a kind of prison, a trap for the human soul. So the source basically says, let's update the language. What the Gnostics called a bad copy of reality, well, today we'd call that assimilation. The story goes that this counterfeit creator, a being they named Yaldabaoth, built this material world specifically to distract us, to keep us from realizing our true nature is not physical. It's an ancient idea, but it perfectly frames our reality as, essentially, a sophisticated holographic projection. Okay, so let's just run with that for a second. If we are in some kind of simulation, and we're being visited by all these different beings, that leads to the final, huge question. Why? What's the point of it all? If our reality is a control system, what is the endgame? This is where all the threads come together in a pretty startling theory. The idea is that the control isn't just some abstract, metaphysical thing. No, it's being put into place right here, right now, by what the source calls a global cult. And their agenda? It's all about creating a super tightly controlled future. We're talking about dismantling personal freedoms and creating a global society where every single person is monitored and managed, kind of like inventory in a warehouse. And according to this analysis, the ultimate goal isn't just to control us. It's to change us, to transform what it even means to be human. The end game is apparently a transhumanist revolution. The plan is to move us away from being these messy, unpredictable biological creatures into something new, something that's integrated with technology, something that can be managed, something predictable. And really, that's the heart of this whole speculative analysis. It's challenging us to connect some pretty wild dots, right? From UFO encounters all the way back to ancient philosophy and then forward to a potential future for all of us. Now, this analysis doesn't claim to have the answers, not at all. But what it does is give us a framework, a way of looking at all of this. And it leaves us with a huge question. It's not just who is visiting us, but where are we being led? And what you do with that question, well, that's entirely up to you.